Sergey Viktorovich, we are on the sidelines of the SPIEF. And first of all, I would like to ask you about the significance of this forum, both politically and economically, especially against the backdrop of the challenges facing Russia and the rapid changes on the international arena.
I believe that any forum that provides a platform for dialogue is useful and significant, especially when this platform attracts representatives from literally every continent without exception. This is what we observe at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum annually. And this is what distinguishes it from other similar or comparable events where they simply stop inviting countries whose leadership pursues a policy that is rejected or which the organizers are trying to cancel, as is happening with Davos and a number of other forums organized by the West. Here, there is absolute freedom of expression. This has been proven more than once. People come here who are interested in sensing the changes taking place on the international arena. By changes, I mean, of course, the onset of the era of the formation of multipolarity, the era of transition from the Western-centric model, which has dominated for the last 500 years, to a polycentric organization of life, where new centers of power, civilization states such as China, India, Russia, Iran, African states, Latin American states, where these countries will occupy a place corresponding to their position in real life, economic development, contribution to world culture, and technological processes. The prototype of a polycentric world order is, of course, BRICS at the global level. And at the Eurasian level, it is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Moreover, the participants of these associations do not close themselves off from the rest of the world, including from our Western colleagues. In particular, within APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, and within the G20, the leading members of BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization work with representatives of the West, primarily with the Western G7, but not only, and defend their position. And the fact that these APEC and G20 forums are preserved, and the West within them, within these structures, is forced, even while trying to maintain its dominance, to still make compromises, that already is worth a lot. True. Right now, the G20 is under a very serious risk due to the decision of the United States, which will host the G20 summit later this year at their place in Miami, but decided not to invite the Republic of South Africa. Here, it is not even possible to say, decided not to invite. They simply decided to exclude the Republic of South Africa by their unilateral decision. This, of course, is completely unacceptable. We are now forming our position both within BRICS and within our other contacts, and at the ministerial meeting of the G20, this issue will be one of the main ones. But returning to your question, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum is one of those platforms where all currents of world politics are represented, where all growth centers are represented at a very solid, authoritative level. What else makes the platform unique? A dialogue takes place here, not only between different continents, between different socio-political systems, but also between heads of state, governments, figures of culture, science, and in general, representatives of public organizations. This is a very useful forum where mutual enrichment takes place. where the exact same issues are simultaneously discussed at roundtables with the participation of both official and unofficial specialists and experts.
Away from Western hegemony, and, as you say, who is present here mainly? Today we see Arab countries. Saudi Arabia is a guest. What does this indicate about a focus toward strengthening ties with the Arab region, with the Gulf countries?
Arab countries always actively participate in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum every year. There are also other representatives of the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf here, including the United Arab Emirates, which is very worthily represented, and our other partners from this region participate in the discussions. I believe that our relations with this Arab Six and with the Arab world as a whole, within the framework of the League of Arab States, are very close, dense, constructive, and friendly. The kind of relations we want to build with all countries. In connection with the mention of the Gulf, of course, we cannot ignore what is happening there as a result of the aggression of the US and Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran. And one of the goals of this adventurous action, I have no doubt whatsoever, was to prevent the process that had begun to emerge. The process of rapprochement, the normalization of relations between the Arabs and Iran, within the framework of discussions on the future of both the Gulf and the adjacent territories. There is a Russian security concept for the Persian Gulf region. We have updated it just now, sent it to our colleagues from the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf, and sent this text to Tehran. Now we will wait for a reaction. This all happened literally just days ago. But the process of polycentricity and multipolarity will, of course, not be easy. For instance, I mentioned BRICS, which includes, for example, Iran and the United Arab Emirates.
Against the backdrop of continuing conflicts, since you just mentioned BRICS, what role does BRICS play in maintaining the balance of power in the region and stability?
The platform itself is always important. On May 15th, I think, in mid-May, we had the BRICS Council of Foreign Ministers, where representatives of both Iran and the United Arab Emirates were present. And there was a rather serious squabble between them there. But nevertheless, both the presiding India and other BRICS countries that participated in this meeting, of course, tried to find ways to initiate a dialogue between the Emirates and Iran. In any case, it must take place at some point. We see a readiness for such a dialogue from a number of other Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia. And of course, those who brewed this soup, who started this adventure, they very much do not want a rapprochement between the Arabs and Iran. But not even a rapprochement, just a normalization of relations. Our concept precisely provides, first of all, for non-aggression. Now, by the way, they have started talking about non-aggression in Saudi Arabia. A non-aggression treaty. Probably, it wouldn't hurt as a first step, but additional steps can also be taken, including an agreement on transparency in military activities, on the limitation of military actions, preparation for maneuvers, and so on. And in general, confidence-building measures. I really hope that common sense will prevail, and this region will begin to agree on how all participants in the process can coexist peacefully, without fearing any military risks. We advocate for this and continue to work with our Arab colleagues.
In your opinion, how or what, in your opinion, is currently hindering this?
I have already mentioned that, of course, Israel definitely does not want a rapprochement between the Arabs and Iran. The United States occupies such an ambiguous position. Today, they might say that the treaty is just about to happen, the Yarmouk Strait will be opened. Tomorrow, they might say that if Iran hesitates for another 2 days, we will start bombing you again. You see, the very talk that Iran must open the Yarmouk Strait, well, it was open until February 28th. There were no problems at all. And I don't know what Washington means when they say that we want to put an end to the 47-year period when Iran terrorized everyone. This is a very propagandistic slogan that is unburdened by historical analysis of what actually happened there. But to say now that we demand the opening of the Yarmouk Strait, well, it was free. And all the talk that now Iran and the Muscat Omanis are going to introduce a fee for passage, and we will not allow it. Well, there never was this fee. Not until this aggression began. The second thesis, which Mark Rubio, speaking in Congress the other day, voiced yet again, is that Iran must accept that it will never have nuclear weapons. But until Iran was attacked in June of last year, the entire leadership there was united around the fatwa of Ayatollah Khamenei, who was killed. Essentially, a political assassination was carried out. And if anything could have changed the mood among the Iranian elite and in Iran as a whole regarding commitment to the principle of non-possession of nuclear weapons, it is precisely this kind of aggression and those actions that the US and Israel carried out and continue to carry out absolutely without any reason. Because yes, and everyone looks at those countries that had developments in nuclear weapons, that had already taken the first such technical steps, as was the case in Libya. As soon as that problem was closed, as soon as Libya gave it up, Gaddafi was overthrown and mockingly killed on live television. To the joy of Hillary Clinton, who literally applauded sitting in front of the screen. But those who do have nuclear weapons, this is the logic that many developing countries have already explained to us. Take the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It is not a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it simply drew the conclusion for itself that without nuclear weapons, it would be wiped off the face of the earth. And they are implementing this choice, and nobody touches them. I am not campaigning for everyone to go down this path. But when it came to Iran, suspicions had never arisen. The IAEA regularly stated in its reports that there were no signs of diverting any aspects of Iran's nuclear program, its energy program, to military needs. And until now, no one has presented any evidence to the contrary. But here is an unsubstantiated accusation. In Venezuela, the Americans made a completely unimaginable move. I can't even remember anything like it. Under the pretext that President Maduro headed a drug cartel. As soon as he was kidnapped, they immediately announced that here we have interest in the oil sector, and we will now somehow take over Venezuela's oil industry for ourselves and explain to our Venezuelan colleagues how they should act, who to sell to and who not to sell to. Regarding Iran, all of this started because Iran had been promoting international terrorism for 47 years. Very quickly, it turned out that the reason, at some stage, the Americans came up with an initiative that the Yarmouk Strait should be controlled 50-50 by them and Iran. This is all about oil again. This is all about world energy markets again. But because of this, Arab countries also experience inconvenience and suffer great losses. This is well known to us. Yes, now they will look for bypass routes. They will build new pipelines. But this is all capital investment. These are all expenses. Whereas natural routes that satisfied everyone for many decades are now at huge risk. Now, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait could also create another hotspot. So the consequences of this aggression are obvious to everyone. I really hope that lessons will be drawn.
I would like to ask you about another conflict, about the Ukrainian one. What are the chances, in your opinion, of achieving a peaceful settlement?
We are ready, as President Putin has repeatedly said. We are always ready for negotiations, but we do not see readiness on the other side. And most importantly, we do not see partners capable of reaching agreements. The fact that the Ukrainians, the regime that came to power after the coup d'etat in February 2014, is absolutely incapable of reaching agreements, I think, doesn't even need to be proven to anyone anymore. And even those who cover for it, finance it, and arm it, they know perfectly well the price of this regime. And they protect Zelensky with such, I would say, furious power, the Europeans do, solely because he is fighting against the Russian Federation for the Europeans, for Western interests as a whole, for the West's idea of suppressing Russia as a competitor, which is what they tried to do on the eve of the First World War, and in the Second World War, and many times over. The Crimean War was built by Western countries in the exact same ideological vein. But when statements now begin to sound from European capitals that we still need to talk to Russia, but we ourselves will decide when and about what. At the same time, I don't even want to quote her, but she still holds the post of head of the EU's foreign policy structure, Kaja Kallas, when she states, "We demand that Russia sit down at the negotiating table, but first let it reduce its army and reduce its armaments, establish some kind of ceiling." And further openly states, as many other European representatives have said, that Europe will not be a mediator at the negotiating table. Well, then what will Europe be? The one dictating terms, accepting an act of capitulation in Russia? Europe has deceived both Russia and the rest of the world repeatedly in the Ukrainian field, starting with the coup d'etat that occurred a day after France and Germany, represented by the current President Steinmeier, by the way, and Poland guaranteed a peace agreement between the then president of Ukraine and the opposition. By morning, the opposition trampled on these guarantees, and the West pretended that these were the twists and turns of the democratic process. A year later, in February 2015, the Minsk agreements, the signatures of the same Germany, the same France, all approved by the UN Security Council, and all of it fell apart. Moreover, both Merkel and the former president of France, Hollande, who signed this document, stated that nobody intended to fulfill them. They needed to buy time, and nobody wanted to implement these agreements. It was necessary to win some time to arm Ukraine for a more active war against the Russian Federation. The West had plenty of opportunities to mediate, especially since they now state in the European Union that we are not mediators. We stand firmly on Ukraine's side. I was surprised that Marco Rubio, speaking in Congress the other day, said the same thing. He said that he doesn't see. He would like the conflict in Ukraine to end this current year, but he doesn't estimate the chances very high because the sides are not yet ready for concessions. especially Russia. This is very strange to hear from a participant of the meeting in Anchorage on August 15th of last year, where President Putin accepted President Trump's proposals, which concerned the primary steps that would allow stopping hostilities and proceeding to negotiations on all aspects of the political settlement already. It was very strange when, after we agreed to the proposals of the United States in Anchorage, the United States began to change its position. Instead of promoting these same proposals in relations with the Ukrainians, they are now pretending that the parties should figure it out themselves. This is not very consistent. Marco Rubio, speaking in Congress, besides saying that Russia is not ready for concessions, stated that the United States is not a mediator because the United States consistently supports Ukraine, continuing to supply weapons and military equipment in the same volumes that were required. In this situation, when they tell us that we are not ready for negotiations, we have already been ready many times over. We have conducted these negotiations many times, supported them, and signed relevant documents. But the West is incapable of reaching agreements and acts on the principle of, I will promise here, then drag out the time. Then either the donkey will die, or whatever it is we have in the Arab proverb. This line, I would say, is dishonest, aimed at gaining unilateral advantages, accumulating them, demanding concessions again, and so on. This line, unfortunately, dominates now. Given what Marco Rubio said, with whom I have business relations, literally 2 weeks ago we discussed the Ukrainian situation that has now developed over the phone. Given what he said about supporting Ukraine, there are no differences essentially between the core approach of the United States and Europe. The external framing, of course, for the United States is much more positive because the United States, ever since Donald Trump came to the White House for the second time, has always advocated for dialogue with Russia. The president is regularly in contact. Besides Anchorage, they have spoken over the phone many times. Rubio and I have met a couple of times in person and periodically communicate by phone. And he, precisely while speaking in Congress, Marco Rubio said that dialogue is always needed, and the U.S. will never give up dialogue. Credit and praise for that. But what is important is not just the dialogue itself, although yes, it is important, but it is also important to implement what was agreed upon. I want to say once again, in Alaska, an understanding was reached, a very clear one, based on a specific proposal from the United States. And if the United States had promoted its initiative for real, I think we would have been at the negotiating table long ago and military actions would have been stopped.
How do you see, in light of what you have said at the moment, the relationship between Russia and the U.S. as a whole, and why are European countries trying so meticulously to disrupt any rapprochement?
Frankly speaking, I think that the essence of the West's position remains unified. And the essence is that the West wants to continue to dominate, as it has done for long centuries in world politics. And it thought that the end of history had arrived when the Soviet Union collapsed. But everything turned out differently. And the objective course of events, the objective development of humanity, has now brought us to the era of the formation of a multipolar, polycentric world order where new centers of economic growth, financial power, and political influence, of course, demand a worthy place in any structures dealing with global governance. a place that will be adequate to their real weight on the international arena. This process is historically determined, it is objective, it is unstoppable, but the West is trying in every possible way to slow it down, resorting to a huge number of unscrupulous methods, starting with illegal sanctions, restricting access to financial instruments, excluding undesirable countries from multilateral structures, and even up to interference in internal affairs, influencing elections, and up to military invasion, as we have observed several times. Therefore, when the U.S. advocates for dialogue, we are in favor. Europe, for me, in its current state under the leadership of these elites, well, for world diplomacy, it is a write-off, by and large. Voices are heard there. We will still talk someday. This is all not serious. They had a huge number of chances, and they failed all of those chances. The United States, when after returning to the White House, Donald Trump called President Putin, they agreed to resume dialogue. We actively welcomed this, and the dialogue continued. Then there was my meeting with Marco Rubio in Riyadh in February of 25. Then there were many contacts. There was also the summit in Alaska, and our colleagues kept telling us, and Donald Trump emphasized publicly, if I were president, there would be no war in Ukraine. This is Biden's war. Nobody needs it. People are dying, and so on. But what Marco Rubio said in Congress about the role of the U.S. not as a mediator, but as a country supporting Ukraine, testifies to the contrary, that Biden's war became Trump's war. Moreover, the Pentagon has a budget and a section on supporting Ukraine through the Pentagon. This support program for Ukraine is approved up until 29, for practically 4 years, for 3.5. And when the United States, a couple of weeks after the summit in Alaska, announced sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft, meanwhile, all the sanctions imposed by Biden are being extended. The United States has declared a goal to dominate world energy markets, hence the Venezuelan story. Hence the displacement of Lukoil and Rosneft from their legitimate projects outside the Russian Federation, and many other things that testify to the desire of the U.S. to subordinate key sectors of the world economy to itself. Energy in the first place, and thereby control processes that will be used to influence China, the Russian Federation, and other competitors, let's say. But primarily China and the Russian Federation. Therefore, we appreciate that the United States took a position, firstly, in favor of dialogue. Secondly, on Ukraine, President Trump said clearly, no joining NATO, and it is necessary to take into account the realities on the ground. Realities which, as I understand, as we see, developed after the referendums held there on returning to Russia. This was precisely at the root, at the foundation of the proposals that the Americans put forward in Alaska. But the Europeans right now, take Ruda, who went to Kyiv and straight up said that Ukraine will be in NATO. He didn't give a damn about the fact that the United States, in the person of President Trump, considers this unacceptable. Ruda simply declared, hugging Zelensky, that Ukraine will be in NATO. And as for recognizing the realities on the ground, which developed as a result of the struggle against the Kyiv regime by the population of these territories, the southeast of Ukraine, it has been publicly stated by Zelensky, and Europe supports him, that there will be no recognition. We will stop the war, accumulate forces, and then we will win back these lands of ours further, so that the Nazi regime is restored on these lands. And the fact that Europe, besides dragging Ukraine into NATO, it is easier for them to accept it into NATO so as not to take the fatal step and include Ukraine in the European Union. It would fall apart then. They understand this perfectly well. But into NATO, yes, there will be joint production of weapons, it already exists, military technologies and so on. But simultaneously, Europe says, well, stop the Russians, we will present terms to the Russians, and we, the Europeans, will provide security guarantees to Ukraine. To that Ukraine which remains after the ceasefire. But this means that they want to perpetuate the Nazi regime without putting forward any demands to it to fulfill the UN Charter, many conventions, its own constitution, the provisions of which charters, conventions, and constitutions concern guarantees of linguistic, religious, and other rights of national minorities. Russians, of course, are not a minority in Ukraine, but their language, their culture, education, and mass media are legislatively banned. Europe wants to perpetuate this, having a permanent staging ground for creating threats to Russia.